Coming up on the Civil Discourse, two leaders from the Santa Fe campus of St. John's College explore what the New York Times has described as the most contrarian college in America in its devotion to the great books and its unique approach to teaching.
If you have a real conversation, you discover what I think we're all struggling to see in our society right now, that you benefit from the diversity of opinions around the table and the diversity of backgrounds around the table, and you develop an appreciation for the complexity and the ambiguity of the kind of phenomena we care about. And that becomes a habit of mind and character that is what the world needs.
Hello, I'm Paula Morantz-Cohen, host of the Civil Discourse, speaking to you from my office at Drexel University in Philadelphia. The goal of the Civil Discourse is to introduce our viewers to guests with diverse opinions and life experiences. These are all accomplished people who, even if we disagree with them, can help us think more critically and empathetically about the world we live in. Today my guests are Mark Roosevelt and J. Walter Sterling, President and Dean, respectively, of the Santa Fe campus of St. John's College. St. John's is a unique college with two campuses in different parts of the country. I think it's worth starting out by reading an abbreviated version of its mission statement. The educational mission of St. John's College is to foster searching consideration of the most important human questions through reading and discussion of great books. The college seeks to free human beings from prejudice and unexamined opinion, and to help students make thoughtful choices in public and private life. Mark Roosevelt and J. Walter Sterling, welcome to the Civil Discourse.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much.
So, Mark, you went to Harvard as an undergraduate, and Walter, you went to St. John's. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but which of you do you think had the better undergraduate education?
Oh, I'm not even going to let Walter try to answer that. Walter did. The way St. John's delivers its education requires much more of students and gives much more to students. I had some great lecturers. I had some fantastic teachers in 300-person lecture classes. And I had some excellent graduate students who were teaching me in the small sections. But I don't have any hesitancy in saying that the average St. John's student gets a far more rigorous education than the average Harvard student.
Okay, well, let's discuss what that education consists of. As I noted in reading your mission statement, St. John's is known as the Great Books College because the great books are taught, more or less a traditional canon, which has come under fire in recent years for being capitalistic and patriarchal and so forth. First of all, can you explain the curriculum and then the rationale for maintaining it in light of so much change in our society today?
I'll start with that, Paula. Thank you for the question. So, as you say, we're known and thought of as the Great Books College, a Great Books College. We study classics of the West from classical antiquity through the 20th century. When people picture that, they picture accurately a list of books, as you say, a kind of recognized canon: Homer, Plato, Shakespeare, Kant, James Joyce, and so on. I think what they miss, and I want to make sure that this is clear from the outside, I think it often isn't, that half of our program is mathematics and natural science. And in a fascinating way, I think in a powerful way, we weave together the study of great books there too: Euclid, Apollonius, Ptolemy, Copernicus, Kepler, Newton, Einstein, Darwin, and so on, with laboratory work, with more technical work in mathematics and natural science. So there's an attempt to study across disciplines, to think in terms of the unity of knowledge across disciplines. It's robust. There's limited room for choice. It's a very full experience. And our faculty teach across all parts of the program, which in some ways I think is even more radical than what we ask our students to do. And we could talk more about the character of the faculty.
How do you respond to the fact that, I mean, I looked at your curriculum, hundreds of readings, most of which I love, having read myself as an undergraduate, many of them, but I was struck that there were only 2 African American authors and 3 women, if I counted correctly, represented. And even though, as we know, the pen has been in the hands of white men, as Jane Austen would put it, it's still odd, it seems to me, given that there are some women and African Americans, more than that could be represented. And so I wonder how you respond to people who ask this, and how often you revise, if you revise, your curriculum.
Let me make a few points on this. We do look at our curriculum every year and we make subtle changes. I think the numbers you mentioned are a little low, but the accurate numbers are not that much higher. But for example, in recent years, in the last 5 years, we've added James Baldwin near the end of the program, which is broadly chronological. That's where he falls. We've added Toni Morrison as a capstone reading in the senior year in our senior language tutorial. We've added Hannah Arendt in the senior year. So the numbers tick up, but they're modest. Many of us would make a distinction between the critique of the canon, which I don't accept. I don't think that those texts are inherently patriarchal, racist, colonial, and so on. I don't think that careful study and exploratory reading of them can sustain that view. So I think those are books for everyone. And I think many of our students from all political persuasions, all backgrounds, all genders find power, resonance in the books we read. For me, that defense is separate from the question of, are there other texts we would like to be reading and that are worthy? And the answer is yes.
I agree that these texts have a great deal to offer students.
I mean, as somewhat of an outsider, Walter is deeper into the program than I am. We do revise. We do think about it. You can attend a faculty meeting and they'll be discussing changing a Hegel reading for literally 4 hours and then decide not to do it. Meanwhile, I'll be pulling my hair out. And I'm not, this is a very good discussion, and we're not afraid of the discussion. I do think we've added, since I've been here, we've added Middlemarch. I think your numbers were low, but I agree with Walter. It's not worth debating the numbers. What I do like to cite is, I don't know if you're familiar with Roosevelt Montas.
Yes.
His book, Rescuing Socrates. He comes here and he spoke at both of our campuses this last year. And the point he makes is please, he says, don't tell me as a Dominican that Plato is any less relevant to my life and growth than he is to my wife who was born in suburban Michigan. These books have meaning to people who look very different from you and me as they do to me and you. That said, I'm generally an advocate for modernizing the program, bringing it forward in time. And as you bring it forward in time, you do add more people of color in particular. And that is what Walter led 2 years ago to bring Baldwin and Morrison and Simone de Beauvoir and others into the program. The harder part is subtracting, because the way it's built, it's like a Lincoln log cabin, right? You pull something out and it makes it less coherent.
Oh, I understand that, and thank you for that. And I guess I did see a curriculum that might be a little out of date. So those were actually some of the figures I was thinking of as worthy. So I'm glad you corrected that. And I just taught Plato's Republic to my students, and they're very diverse in terms of their backgrounds. They were taken with it and were able to see both the contradictions and the negative elements and the extraordinarily fruitful and effective ways of thinking that Socrates has. So I completely agree with you there. Now about the science, and this is something that my husband, who's a scientist, had noted. that he thought it odd that you have primary texts in science, since science, unlike the humanities, builds on itself. So yes, there are primary texts that have a historical interest, but from a scientific point of view, I don't see them having the same kind of relevance as, Plato and Aristotle, for example, in the humanities, in literature and philosophy. Can you explain to me the rationale there, and whether there are any contemporary scientific texts that you read as well?
I would say our rationale is that we think in terms of reading foundational texts and arguments that set the horizon within which contemporary science unfolds. So when we read Einstein might not be the state of the art, but Einstein has laid foundations that stand today. The same thing with Heisenberg, the same thing with Darwin, et cetera. So I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is we don't pretend to be training state-of-the-art research scientists who are going to step directly from our classroom into a contemporary research setting, though many of our students do go into academic and career directions in the sciences and medicine and so on, and they view this as very good preparation, but they have to build a bridge. But we view it as liberal education, studying natural science not as a separate culture and a separate domain, but as a domain of human reason, human inquiry, and one that can be explored in the context of the liberal arts and sciences, liberal education. So I think we're doing many things at once that are not as far from the activities that practicing scientists and specialists do, but that also challenge the model of restricting the liberal arts and liberal education to the humanities, which is something that we are vehemently against. We think liberal education penetrates all areas of human inquiry and human reason.
Okay, well, that's very well put. Although I wonder, since your faculty are not necessarily experts in an area, in science, if you're reading a scientific text that's been superseded in some way or contradicted, do they have the knowledge to be able to explain that, or is that not relevant?
There's a heuristic Socratic model that we're always practicing, and our faculty do not position themselves as professorial authorities. I think that throughout what we do, there's a posture of this is what we can learn from what's in front of us. And that's an open and rolling horizon. And we know, look, the issue with our students isn't that they come in thinking there aren't scientists that know the answers in laboratories. The issue is they think somebody else has all the answers and they're cut off from it. And actually what we're trying to do is empower them to realize that they're on a path of agency and self-moving inquiry.
So I want to switch gears for a moment and talk about the fact that you have two campuses. You're the Santa Fe campus, but that you also have an Annapolis campus in Maryland, which was the original St. John's before this one was founded. What's the rationale for two campuses, and what are the differences, if any? There must be some differences in the two, and what you try and do in Santa Fe versus Annapolis.
Not much difference, Paula. The curriculum is not identical, but it's almost identical. The atmospheres and the ethos are different. This campus is Western. That's a traditional East Coast, bricks on the buildings, college. Our bricks are on the ground here, not our buildings, which are adobe. And the reason it was founded, Santa Fe, as you pointed out, Annapolis is the third oldest college in the country, is that they wanted to offer what we have to more folks. But they didn't want to change the small college feel of Annapolis. So enlarging Annapolis was not their choice. It was to go west. So it's pretty nice for students. They can transfer back and forth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and to some East Coasters, of course, going to Santa Fe feels like study abroad. And vice versa. We have the same governing board. We have something called a college-wide president, which is me. We have a president in Annapolis, but It's set up that I make college-wide decisions. And we've integrated a lot of the functions that are integratable, like advancement and admissions, so that we're more administratively lean.
Great. That's a good thing nowadays.
Oh, yes, it is. Oh,
It's
yes.
very rare. And I guess that's one of the ways you keep your tuition relatively low.
That's one of the ways. We're also greatly benefited by having a very generous alumni body. So we were able to lower our tuition by a third 4 years ago, and we want to hold the line. I mean, we're so proud, as you pointed out in your introduction, of being contrarian, but there was one thing that we're ashamed that we were not contrarian about. We let our tuition escalate like most places did, and that we think was a mistake. So we brought it back, and we hope to keep it as low as humanly possible in the decades to come.
Well, I want to talk a bit about a podcast that you recently launched called Continuing the Conversation, which is sort of in line with this TV show and with the book I recently wrote on conversation. So I'm very much about the importance of conversation in terms of people growing as individuals and figuring out what they think, as well as bridging difference. So I wonder if you tell me a little bit about what the goal of the podcast is and how it fits with your general mission statement as a university, as a college, rather.
So continuing the conversation, as you say, it's a video series. It's our first series like this and a podcast. Folks can find the video series at our website, sjc.edu, and there are links there to the podcast format and providers. For decades, really, we've felt like there's a kind of magic, a kind of chemistry to the St. John style conversation in the classroom. Our students, our faculty, between our faculty, it's patient, it's probing, it's dialogical, it goes deeply and carefully into texts, but then vibrates out into living and present themes and issues. So this is our attempt, and we're thrilled about it. They're conversations between faculty members on various themes. They explore text. They range from talking about food and the good life to travel to freedom to Euclid's optics. There are all kinds of themes explored across the episodes. And that's reflective of our kind of care and metabolism and exploration, which I think we need more of in the world today, the world of decreasing attention.
Well, yes, and I've written about this. I believe the college seminar is a training ground for conversation of a certain kind that needs to be exported beyond so that we can have good citizens who engage in conversation. So I agree, and definitely I hope our audience will check these out. Could you talk a little bit about the kinds of people that you attract to teach your courses, and what does that mean, not to be an expert, but to be nonetheless in charge of a classroom?
These things seem semantic to some when they look at us, but they're not. I mean, we don't have professors. We have tutors, and it's because they don't profess. And one of the things I had to learn when coming here is that this means so much is different. Question is different here. At many places, not necessarily your classroom, Paula, at many places, a professor asks the class a question because they know the answer and they want to see if the class does. A question here from a tutor is an invitation to go on a journey. There may not even be an answer at the end of that journey. And the other thing we tell folks, and again, it seems odd, is our tutors are learning alongside the students. They're kind of the senior learner in the class, and they provoke shared discoveries. And all of our tutors will tell you that they learn something every year about a nook and a cranny in a book they love, like a War and Peace or Middlemarch, or a book they really love, and then somehow what happens in the classroom illuminates a corner of that book that they'd never gotten to in their minds before. So who do we attract? We get 50 applicants for every position we hire, and they're mainly folks. Maybe they wrote their dissertation on French medieval poetry, but they don't want to spend their whole life there. They want to continue learning. They want to expand their own horizons, and they value teaching. We don't require publications. We don't require research. We require attentiveness in the classroom, creativity in the classroom.
There's nothing more exciting than learning alongside students and reading a text perhaps that you don't know well with students and finding that they can bring insights that you never would have thought of. So it does sound wonderful. And I noticed that you have a 7-to-1 ratio of students to instructor, and that allows you to have, I guess, all your classes are seminar style.
Yep, all of them are. We have no adjunct faculty. So no lectures, no adjunct faculty. Our program, our core program is expensive. And that's why we have to do, as you pointed out, Paula, we have to stay lean administratively. It's why we don't have fancy dorms, fancy food facilities. Neither campus has a swimming pool. I mean, our money is spent in the classroom, and it is an expensive program to run.
And you do attract a certain kind of student. There's a self-selection, I assume, involved. Can you describe the student? I mean, these are students coming from high school. They must have a degree of self-awareness to choose St. John's. What do you find is common among them?
We spend so much time asking that question of ourselves. My answer is they're seekers. They're unusual. They're willing to take a risk and willing to work really hard, because you asked me about Harvard versus St. John's, you will work harder. No question about it. But so they are really unusual. I have lunch every day in the cafeteria, and I have a table where students can come, and their lunchtime conversations are so remarkably different than ours were. But the best word I have for them, and Walter could probably do this better, is they're seekers. And they know they're seeking something. And maybe they didn't have a good high school experience. You're right, our students are self-selecting, and we do take risks on students who had difficult high school experiences, but didn't feel at home. They didn't feel like they were in the right place. And for many of those students, we are the right place.
So we're actually almost out of time, but I wondered if you could tell me what you think at St. John's could be or should be exported to other universities in this country. I mean, is there anything that's particularly fundamental that you think about, and especially given the state of our country right now, the divided state, the inability to talk across difference that we're seeing, what is it at St. John's that you think needs to be embedded in education more generally?
I apologize, Walter, I'm talking too much, but maybe I think there's two things, Paula, that we really care about. Listening, taking other people's opinions seriously, and being respectful of other people's views. One year we had Sonia Sotomayor here as a guest, and Judge Mukasey. People from opposite ends of the political spectrum, both treated respectfully. I think one of the things we do really well here is we challenge students out of their comfort zone. So as Walter said, these may be math-phobic students, but when they read Euclid, they come to a different understanding of what mathematics can be and how it can be taught and learned. I think that it is healthy for college students to take courses outside of their comfort zone, outside of where they already feel proficient. And when it's done well, it empowers them. They get empowered to know they can overcome fear, get good at something that they didn't think they could. So those would be my two. Walter probably has better ones.
I certainly agree with all of that. One of my colleagues who's been asked this question a lot because of a book she's published, she says if there was one thing she'd like to see exported, it's simply small classes. If everywhere we could have small classes. But what I'd like to do, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. The small class means you can have a real conversation. If you have a real conversation, you discover what I think we're all struggling to see in our society right now, that you benefit from the diversity of opinions around the table and the diversity of backgrounds around the table, and you develop an appreciation for the complexity and the ambiguity of the kind of phenomena we care about. And that becomes a habit of mind and character that is what the world needs and lacks terribly. So small classes that can be conversational, and then the power of the voices around the table and the different perspectives. It's amazing how our students and our faculty read text carefully, come to class, and leave so altered in what was important and what they could see in that book. And I think you get that more powerfully from doing what we do than from hearing the best lecturer.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, you've expressed very much my philosophy of teaching and learning. And I wish I could talk more. I think you've, though, given us a really good taste of the philosophy and the mindset of your college. I would recommend that our audience listen to the podcasts that you're putting out. So thank you so much for joining us today, Mark Roosevelt,
Thank
J.
you,
Walter
Paula.
Sterling.
Thank you.
We've loved the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was great. And I want to thank our audience for joining us on the Civil Discourse.